Sharif loves to run. He enjoys leisurely runs throughout New Haven's beautiful parks. But don't be surprised if you see him zooming by. As an undergraduate, he was nationally ranked in the 800-meter and 8,000-meter runs. Along the way, he received a master's degree in cognitive neuroscience from the University College London and a bachelor's degree from Ohio Wesleyan University. Now Sharif is a first-year neuroscience PhD student here back on Earth at Yale. He is most interested in studying consciousness and how people think using magnetics and electrodes. But I promise he won't stab you with the electrodes. He will tease our brain and explore depths that have seldom been reached. Please help me welcome Sharif.
What is consciousness? This has been debated for literally thousands of years, but for our purposes, we'll say consciousness is two things. First, it's how something feels. And second, it's your ability to think about yourself, other people, and the world. Now, over the course of these hundreds and thousands of years of people trying to figure out what is consciousness, where is consciousness, two competing positions have come into existence. And those two competing positions are materialist and dualist. So I'll tell you about them now. So we'll start with the materialist, or materialism. So the materialists tell us that consciousness is fundamentally a physical phenomenon. And in particular, it's something that happens in the brain. So your brain is making consciousness happen through the cells, the synapses, the activity, the talking that's going on between your neurons in your head. Now, the opposing position, dualism, tells us something very different. It says that the universe is fundamentally two things. On the one hand, we have physical stuff that's made of matter, stuff that's made of atoms, molecules, cells, proteins, bricks, concrete, steel, things that you can see, that you can touch, that you can smell. But then there's this other piece of the universe, which is not physical. They call it immaterial. It's not made of atoms. It's not made of matter. And they tell us that consciousness is fundamentally within this sphere of immaterial things, the non-physical thing. So we have two competing positions. We have the materialist, consciousness is in the brain, and the dualist say that consciousness is a non-physical thing. It's an immaterial phenomenon. So what I'd like to do now is I want to challenge our view of these two opposing theories with the following thought experiment. Mary, the color neuroscientist. Okay? I have a little story to tell you guys. So here's Mary. She's a brilliant neuroscientist who lives a few decades from now. And she knows everything there is to know about how color is processed in the brain. So she knows exactly about how the photons of light enter your eye, reach the back of your eye, called the retina. The retina processes the information, brings it all together, it's sent down the optic nerve, goes all the way to the back of your brain, right back here, where the brain begins to process the vision through various filters. So she knows every single step in this process. There is nothing more that Mary can learn about how color vision is processed in the brain. But here's the thing about Mary. She's never seen color before. She has a disease. She's completely colorblind, and not the male green, red colorblindness. She's never seen color at all. So she sees the world in black, white, and gray. But one day, with our fancy technology of the future, we're able to restore her color vision. So now she can see color. And let's say we present to Mary, we've just restored her color vision, and we have this beautiful red rose, and let's say we present that red rose to Mary. Okay? My question to all of you is, what will her reaction be when she sees that red rose? Does she look at that red rose in delight and surprise? Oh my goodness, I couldn't even imagine red could be so vibrant, red could be so pretty. Or does she look at that red rose, not surprised, sort of shrug her shoulders and say something like, duh, I already knew what red would look like, even though I had never seen red before, because I knew exactly how red and all color is processed in the brain? So it's now your time to decide. Okay? She's surprised or she's not surprised. So show of hands for surprise when she sees that red rose. Okay, a little over half. Okay. Show of hands for not surprised. Okay. Okay, I like it. I like it. We've got some competing positions here. Very good. As I said, this has been a debate. So not surprisingly, depending on your response, it tells us something important about that debate between the dualist and the materialist. So for the 2/3 of you that said she will be surprised, that's tantamount to saying that dualism is true and materialism is false. And the reason for that is, if you remember, she knows everything there is to know about how color vision is processed in the brain, but that knowledge wasn't enough to tell her about the consciousness of color. And so what that tells us is that the consciousness part of it is outside of her knowledge and therefore outside of the physical world, the stuff that she knew. Now there's an additional implication to that. We can't really study consciousness fundamentally if this is true, because it's non-physical. We don't have the technology, nor, I suppose, will never have the technology to probe something that's non-physical, right? Now, if you said the exact opposite about 1/3 of you, she's not surprised. Well, we have the opposite implication. So now, materialism is true, dualism is false. And again, the reason for this is her knowledge of color vision and how it's processed in the brain was all she needed to know to tell her about the consciousness of color. And the additional implication is that we can study consciousness because it's a physical thing. It's a brain thing. Now, personally, I am a passionate materialist. Oh my goodness. Materialist. And as a materialist, one of the things I'm interested in doing is studying how consciousness is processed in the brain. And so let's get back to the original question I was presenting, which is, where is consciousness in the brain? And this is something that I'm very interested in studying. And there's really 2 theories on where it might be in the brain. And here's the first. So the first theory says that consciousness is in one place in the brain. So there's one special place where all the information in your brain sort of comes together, and that place in the brain turns it into a conscious experience. Theory 2 says something different. It says that lots of different places in your brain are being involved in consciousness. So it's a collaborative effort. Various places in the brain are working together to make you conscious. Okay? Now, the reason why answering this question is so important, it's not only just for curiosity, it's not only for solving a debate that's been going on for literally 3,000, 4,000 years, but there are people who have unusual conscious states. And here are a few examples of those clinical populations. People with epilepsy, people who are in minimal or vegetative states, and people who have locked-in syndrome. And there's many more that I'm not listing here. And with a better knowledge of how consciousness works and where it is, we might be able to treat these populations much better than we do today. So let's move on now and talk about some of the research I'm doing at Yale in the lab of Dr. Hal Blumenfeld, who's been studying this topic for quite some time. So we're using this special technique called EEG. Okay? So here I am with an EEG device on my head, and all these wires and electrodes are coming out. And this is how it works. So your brain is constantly talking to itself. There's all these cells, about 10 billion of them, and they're all talking to one another. And one of the ways they talk is with electrical signals. And sometimes those electrical signals sort of leak out of your head. And what we're able to do with EEG and these electrodes is we're able to capture those leaking signals. And actually, good news for us is those signals tell us a lot about what's happening inside your head. So we have subjects who we put this EEG device on their head, and then we have them complete a consciousness test. So this is how this test works. So we show them a computer screen, nothing on it as first, and then a few moments later, a face pops up, and then we ask them, Did you see the face? Okay? But here's the thing. The face flashes very quickly. So about half the time, they say, nope, didn't see the face. And the other half of the time, they say, yeah, I saw the face. So essentially, half the time they're conscious of the face, and the other half of the time they're not. And what we're interested in doing is understanding how the brain activity differs between those two states, the conscious state and the unconscious state. So let's look at some results. So when our subjects say, nope, didn't see the face, they're not conscious, this is what we see. We see activity just in the back of the brain in a place called the occipital lobe, or the primary visual cortex. So this is the part of the brain that deals with with vision, and also can do things like that as well, but just vision in general. And this makes sense because we're asking them to do a visual task. They're sitting there and they're looking, and so we'd expect to see activity in the back of the brain, but that's all we see. But now, when they are conscious of the face, we see something different. So we first see activity beginning back in that visual area again, and then a few moments later, it hops a little forward, then it jumps all the way to sort of the top front of the brain, and then finally ends in moving to the bottom front of the brain here. So what we're seeing when someone says they're conscious is this dynamic motion and movement of activity across the brain. And so now let's go back to those two theories that we were initially talking about. So remember, theory 1 says consciousness is one place in the brain, and theory 2 says consciousness is a collaborative effort. It's occurring across various brain networks. So again, I'm going to have you show your hands for theory 1 based off of our evidence. Oh, no one. Okay. Theory 2. Who supports theory 2? Okay, so that's really where we're thinking this research is going down. And there's been previous research that showed this is also seems to be a case. Lots of parts of the brain are being involved in producing a conscious state. Now, this is how I would like to end today, which is, I need your help. Okay? This is a challenging subject. And people, the smartest people who have lived for hundreds of years, have attempted to answer some of the questions we talked about today. And it still remains a profound mystery, perhaps the greatest mystery. Okay? So I need all of you who are interested to become neuroscientists, become psychologists, and even philosophers. They have a role to play. And so we can come together and work on solving these issues. And perhaps, if we're all on the same page, we're all doing the same type of research, we can be the last generation to say that consciousness was a mystery. Thank you. I'll take any questions.